MIT legacy. So it gives us great pleasure to co-host tonight with the Office of the Arts at Harvard and with Stage Source. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Louis, who will guide you through this evening. Thank you again for coming.
I will try to guide us, and I will use my father's constant patience as we go forward. Because many of you in this room work in theater know things always go wrong. So tonight we have a couple things. We have an Amtrak train that's stuck somewhere in the woods, which we'll get here when it gets here with a couple of people who are going to speak tonight. We also have some technical snafus. We've been making some videos and stills, and hopefully those will work tonight. But, you know, we'll see. So like any TCB or Wheeler production, there's always elements of danger and surprise, and we collectively are going to step off the cliff. And the good news is we kept saying, everyone keep your, use just a few comments. You can't talk, you can't talk. So now if the videos and the stills don't work, then you can't talk. Hopefully they will. Hopefully they will. So, thank you all for being here. And it's amazing to have everyone together in one room. So many friends and family members and colleagues. And it just makes me wish my dad were here live to see it, because I know that he would be so excited to be here with you. In this room, the Loeb, built in 1960, Dad directed 14 plays for the American Repertory Theater in this very room, on this very stage. Before that, he did, I think, about 5 or 6 plays for the Theater Company of Boston at the Loeb, starting in 1969-70 with a couple Pinter plays, Sam Shepard, La Trista, Richard III, Resistible Rise of Arturo Ui, Cat on Hunting Roof, all in this room. So there really is no better place that we could be together to honor my dad. And I thank the American Repertory Theater for hosting us all, and I thank you all for coming in the midst of this rain. And I think Dad, despite all the hurdles we're going to face tonight, Dad would be glad that it's raining, because the Red Sox will be rained out, and we're not having this during a Red Sox game, which will make him very upset. So that's all I have to say right now, and we'll go on with the evening. Thank you all for coming.
My name is Bob Scanlan. I'm a professor of the practice of theater in the English department here at Harvard. And I've been asked by my friends and my colleagues in the Office for the Arts at Harvard to speak my own brief piece about David. And I've been told that I really must keep it brief. And I want to, now that I see who's speaking after me, I want to hear you all. But I have indeed, as Louis just said, shared almost my entire theatrical life in this building, and most of it with David. I spent innumerable productions at his side here in rehearsal halls, all over the place and all over the Northeast, attending almost everything he did. This starting when I was an undergraduate. The Theater Company of Boston was introducing all of us to Pinter and Beckett, Brecht productions, bringing the spirit of the Circle and the Square in downtown under the direction of Jose Quintero, actually a huge influence on David, to Boston, so that we were sharing in that same immense cultural moment. David has been a giant in our field. So I'm speaking, I'm going to be speaking on my own behalf, but also I'd like to greet you all on behalf of the Harvard University faculty. Not many of whom are none of whom are actually going to be speaking, but David is an important part of our faculty, of our teaching mission here at Harvard, and it's not only humbling but an honor tradition and continuing his work. And also to greet you in the name of the Harvard alumni. David, as almost all of you know, was an alumnus, Eliot House, class of 1947, and he was an English major. He graduated from my own department now, and he carried with him into his theatrical career something that is deeply learned here under the tutelage of that great humanistic tradition that the English department represented then, continues to represent. And it is in that spirit that my fellow colleagues are here with me with my remarks to show how indeed this is a Harvard phenomenon. The theater that this man devoted himself to for 60 years was indeed hatched here. His deep humanistic roots and his motivations for being in the theater, his objectives of bringing a high cultural ambition to every single minute of his work, interminable work and unceasing work. And he did his best examples by his work constantly. In the rehearsal hall is where he was the great teacher that he was, more so than in the classroom. And his individual productions have educated hundreds of people all over, thousands. He left Harvard in 1947 with a strong interest in going pre-med. He had an interest in psychology, which he got a grant to pursue, went to Paris, and he meant to go pre-med and with possibly a career in psychiatry in the back of his mind. But the grant took him to Paris, where he got seduced by the Parisian theater and several important members of future members of the American theater scene, including Madeleine Mines in formation in the early 50s, mid-50s. That particular group, those particular people, included Philip Glass and Paris, as a very young graduate, actually reoriented him to that theater of Beckett, UNESCO, and all the rest that were creating such a sensation right there in Paris at that time, but also whose global scope was pretty obviously in the offing. And David came back, re-enrolled at Harvard as a graduate student, and pursued his studies in comparative literature, a course of action as training for the theater, which I highly recommend. I followed his example years later, and it was specifically his example. As an undergraduate, I started attending the Theater Company of Boston. When I came back with my PhD in hand, I became the director of the drama program at MIT, and MIT granted me a similar leave to go to Paris. And I asked David Wheeler, already a hero of mine at that time, this is 30 years ago, 30 some odd years ago, and he took over the drama program while I was away. And we've been extremely close colleagues and friends ever since. Harvard was really in every way David's alma mater. His work, as I've said, is one long tribute to the kind of humanism he learned here, the depth of literary study, literary consciousness, and the tremendous ambition to find out not just the new and the novel, but actually the significant, to create significant social theater. In the long tradition, it also goes back to Harvard at the end of the, right before, in fact, World War I and right after World War I, the George Pierce Baker era, of which he was very conscious and actually constantly referred to his own sense of working in a tradition. One of the things that I'd like to leave with those of you who are either my students or my colleagues as the continuing mission after David's passing, which is a difficult transition for all of us who knew him so well. David never worked in the theater one day in his life for money. He just never did. They paid him, of course, he sort of had to live. But in fact, his ambition and his deepest drive was anchored somewhere so completely different that it never crossed his mind. This is something we learned here. This is something we should continue to teach. And I hope we indeed can make a pretty deep dedication to follow in his footsteps. He wasn't alone in creating that standard. The standard actually was something that surrounded theater culture at that time. And it was a great gratification to me when Bob Brustein, when he took charge of this building, and Rob Orchard both showed tremendous understanding of exactly that aspect of David Wheeler, and made him a regular contributor to the American Repertory Theater through some of the most astonishing years that I've spent in the theater, and the 80s and 90s, and all the way up until this decade, the one that just finished, in fact, and David worked all the way through. So I'm eternally grateful to Bob Brustein and Rob Orchard for bringing him here. Then they brought me here, and it was like a perfect storm as far as I was concerned. I got to work directly in the tradition, watch David work in the rehearsal hall, find out what that magic consisted of. And there are many people here who are going to attest to his magical touch with actors, so I won't touch on that, although that's a huge part of his legacy. But I was in a unique position to watch something else, which is, again, something that goes back to his deep training in literature and conflict at Harvard. He was intellectually a giant. He frequently looked like a fumble bomb in rehearsal. You all know this, you all know it. And at the same time, I grew to admire his mind as it expressed itself formally. I have never seen anybody have a greater capacity to hold the whole formal unit in his mind, edit and critique it as he worked in the rehearsal hall. Almost everybody was aware that he was working with actors and the psychology of all these personal interrelationships. That's why I say you love it, and you'll hear about that. But what gradually grew on me was play after play after play, and a style that deeply affected my own directing work of digging while a light touch is taking place, digging with his mind with ferocious intensity. His ability to edit a scene, to edit a play, to walk into somebody else's disaster, to figure out quickly the dramaturgical cure for the disease that he could pinpoint was astonishing. No one had ever a greater developed histrionic sensibility, and that never expresses itself in words. It's not a yucky thing. It's something you carry with you in an energy in rehearsal, which is, I've never seen his like in that regard. So play after play did something along those lines. He was terrible at promoting himself, just terrible at it. He seemed, something got in the way. I was there frequently while he was pushing a play, not just in this theater but elsewhere. And theater directors, and he was one of them, have to work all the time finding work, all the time. It's an amazing thing. If we had a fully subsidized theater as they do in Europe, where many of our models come from, that would not be a part of the daily grind, especially of a master of his caliber. But for some reason, when it came to selling himself, something got in the way. Many people think that was humility. I know David well enough for so many years that it was the opposite. He was too proud to stoop for his work. And he was so ferociously proud of the talent he knew he carried. It was always an honor to work at his side. It would be tremendously missed, but as other great people in the theater with whom I've worked, Harold Pinter is gone now, Samuel Beckett. One of the best tributes we can pay to the departed is to continue their example and to actually try to make what he stood for continue to live in our example. So, it's a heavy heart that I say goodbye to David on this occasion, but at the same time, I hope all of us take a kind of renewed dedication of what he stood for. And why not? Let's start the theater company of Boston up again. We got Louis here.
Fantastic.
speak of an aspect of David's life that he never put forward, and that some of you may not be entirely familiar with. I shall start by giving you just the very first line of an account he wrote some years back. I read, on March 1, 1945, the heavy 81mm mortar section, Company M, 331st Infantry Regiment, 83rd Division, was ordered to accompany the riflemen of I Company to occupy a village in the Rhineland. Now, originally, I had hoped to make major use of Dave's account, and I was going to act as interpolator and narrator and providing some technical detail. And I timed myself out, and it took well over half an hour. So you'll be spared that. I have to put everything in my own words from notes. I am afraid that it will turn into a war story, which I didn't want. I wanted to bring some of the feeling of that time, the atmosphere, and I wanted in particular to bring forth some of Dave's feelings, which I know he had, because all infantrymen did. And he was not very good, as has been observed in speaking his own feelings. He elicited feelings from other people. And in this account, he makes a try at it from time to time, saying how things were, but mostly he just says what was happening and what he did. So I will try to piece that out a little. I am going to continue to read for a moment. Moving across open fields at 5:30 a.m. Typically, Dave gives you the time of day. At 5:30 a.m., with huge, dim haystacks looming above us, we cautiously approached a village in battle formation. We met no resistance, and finally unclenched our gun fingers as we entered the empty village, little more than a few clusters of buildings along a half-mile stretch of country road, and commandeered a substantial two-story house as our 81mm mortars base of operations. Now I'm going to have to digress a little bit to talk about mortars and how they operated and the armament of the mortar section. 15-man section. Mortars are not a close combat frontline weapon. They may be close behind the riflemen, but they are always, if possible, in concealment. And they are, you're surely somewhat aware of what a mortar looks like. You drop a shell into the tube and you duck aside, it goes way the hell up and comes straight down onto the people you don't like. The mortar section has a jeep. They don't ride in the jeep, it creeps along with them. And the mortars are carried in that, and the ammunition is carried in that, and miscellaneous other weapons. But the mortarmen themselves are quite lightly armed. You know, pistols, maybe carbines. They're not expected to directly engage. The mortarmen who are there with the tubes are guided from spotters who may be 200 yards, could even be as much as a quarter-mile distant, who are in the position, which is a little bit fortunate, of knowing what's going on very dimly, believe me, you don't see much. But what there is to see, if they're lucky, they see it and they radio it back to the gunners and direct the fire of the mortars, which are adjusted, 2 clicks up, 1 click right, and fire for effect. But being an observer, as you discover, carries a little risk. Dave is the one who carries the radio, 50-pound radio, which he probably has carried by now for a number of miles since probably about midnight last night. The I Company has sent 2 platoons to do the rifleman work, if necessary. Each platoon has about 35 men or so, roughly. Besides the mortar section, 15 men. There is the I Company commander and his immediate small staff, runners and so forth, of about 8 men. So putting it all together, this is a total American presence of 83 people or so, soldiers. And their mission is not a combat mission. They're here to sit down and make sure that nothing unpleasant is coming this way. So anyhow, Dave and Lieutenant Lehman, who is in charge of he's a commanding officer of the mortar section, but you can pretty much forget Lieutenant Lehman because he drops from view very quickly. Lieutenant Lehman and Staff Sergeant Galindo and Dave. You can remember Galindo's name. Galindo is, as Dave describes him, a heavy-set, unshakable Mexican-American from Texas. Dave with a radio, Lieutenant Lehman, and Sergeant Galindo go forward and set up an observation post in the top floor of the local school, which is the only building of any size in this little village, and start looking around. And as they're doing that, they've noticed sticking out from one of these haystacks and then another are the barrels of 88-millimeter cannon. These are Tiger tanks. Now, I won't speak at length about Tiger tanks except that they are a terrible weapon. There is no American tank that can stand up against them. So, and besides those, the 1 or 2 that they see in the haystack, there is one Tiger tank which is 2 houses down in the yard with its barrel poking out. Well, someone, it has to have been Lehman, says let's fire on them. What Dave describes as exploratory fire. This is a really dumb decision. You don't explore a Tiger tank. You can't possibly do any damage to a Tiger tank. What they're after, if Lehman has given this any thought, what they're after is infantrymen, because Tiger tanks don't travel alone. They have supporting troops, German infantry with them. So they fire, as Dave says, 9 exploratory rounds. And they certainly don't see much except the puffs when they land. They seem to be in the right general area. So they start radioing the next set of instructions back to the mortar section, which is, about 200 yards off that way. saying 100 yards wide, and boom, the wall beside them evaporates. A tiger has fired back, and they are stunned and concussed, and their air is filled with dust, and they're half blind, and they get out of there in a hell of a hurry. And they run back, the three of them, Lehman, Galindo, and Dave, to the I Company command post. And there they discover the I Company commander in a rage of frustration because he cannot get radio contact with either of his platoons, those 38 riflemen, which presumably are dispersed front and back of this town. Lehman stays there with him, and we presume they'll get things sorted out, but right now, nobody's talking to anybody. Dave and Galindo go back to where the mortar section is and give them the bad news. They know about us, and things may get very hairy. So they start to wait, as Dave says in the account. Waiting is what the infantryman does. Nothing happens. There's been no sound except the 9 mortar rounds off there and the return cannon shot. So they wait and they look out. They can't really see anything. They can see the house across the street. They can see some stretch of fields off this way. But they wait, and nothing keeps happening. And eventually they come to the conclusion that either these guys are at a standoff, you leave us alone, we'll leave you alone, or what is more likely? Since the German armies are retreating, they're being beaten, what is more likely is that they have simply pulled out and gone somewhere else. So they, after 5 hours or so, and it's getting toward evening, and mist is coming in, it's been a pleasant, sunny day, which they may marginally appreciate. At that length of time, they begin to feel pretty good, and a lot of them go to sleep. A lot of them have probably been asleep straight along, because that's the other thing the infantry does. You sleep when you can. You know, this wonderful little quiet, when you're not here, you're somewhere else in your dreams. But you're away from this, you're not here. And nothing else keeps happening. Now, there's a thing that puzzles me, and certainly puzzled Dave at the time. He makes no mention of it whatsoever in his account. But the puzzlement is, you have riflemen out there somewhere. The Germans have infantry. Why haven't they collided at some point, bumped up against each other? Because usually you hear a snapping of rifle fire, a lot of noise, right? And there's been nothing all this time except those 9 mortar rounds and the cannon shot. But they figure, well, that they've probably drawn off. But the time has passed. They search around the house. They even find blankets, which is lucky because they won't be sleeping on the bare floor for once. Quilts and blankets, a few blankets and quilts. And they settle down and sleep. Now, I will go outside this immediate story, outside guys in that house and tell you what is really going on. There are not just the 2 or 3 tanks that David, Galindo, and Lehman have seen. In this area, in this village and surrounding country, there are more than 20. They are set up here waiting to ambush the American 2nd Armored Division. Now, actually, the American 2nd has turned north. And the Germans may be in the process of finding this out. But right now, nobody in that room, nobody in this house knows anything about this. They just know where they are, and nobody is punishing them there at the moment. So they go to sleep. And they're away. You're asleep. It's precious. And then you are waked up early in the morning. One of the I Company runners says they are up the street, up that road, with a tank, at least one tank, and they are clearing houses, and they are coming in this direction. Now, right then and there, as Dave phrases it, there was a short, hard-edged argument. And a main voice of the thing says, we're going down and say, oh, I left something out. I Company's 1st platoon has seen these guys out there first, and they have done the prudent thing. They have drawn back into the houses, they've gone down in the cellars, and they're being very, very quiet. The other platoon at the other end of town has not been quite so lucky, depending on your definition of luck. They have found themselves surrounded, and they have surrendered without firing a shot. So, the American... Yes, I understand. I'm urged to abbreviate my remarks. I will do so as best I can. But this is a part of Dave that is important to me, and we are here to pay tribute, and this is my tribute. The other platoon has given up. And the American effective force now consists of 14 mortarmen and 8 or so I Company personnel who are never actually seen from again, or heard from. God only knows what they were doing. And the mortarmen have this debate. 8 of them, including the sergeant who commands this section below, Lehman, who is absent, say we are going down cellar. They come along, we will surrender. If we're lucky, they won't shoot us. The other 8 men, including Dave, go upstairs, crank their mortars almost vertically because the Germans are only about 150 yards away, and open fire. Again, a reckless thing to do to declare war. They have in their favor the fact that the Germans themselves previously have erected a roadblock against American tanks. Now, I am going to read again from Dave's account. Our upstairs handful aimed the backyard mortars up the street at a tank a few hundred yards away, essentially point-blank range for the 81mm, and zeroed in by lobbing a few high-pointing rounds. The advancing Tiger tank was stopped by a roadblock of logs in a narrow street, a pile of jutting huge pickup sticks 150 yards away. Since our detonating shells would have no effect on the tank. We waited for the moments when the tank gunners stopped firing to allow their infantry a chance to remove the logjam. Then we pummeled their foot soldiers, who were desperately pulling and hauling the heavy tree trunk logs. Like all infantry, the Germans hated the screeching, bursting, killing mortar shells and stumbled for cover. It became a checker game, or maybe a three-way game. Scissors cut paper, rocks break scissors, paper covers rock. In this village, the buildings on either side were flush with the street, so the German Tiger tank could not move down the street until the logjam was cleared. But the German infantry could not clear the logjam without mortars firing, and the tank could not directly shell the building, which shielded our mortar. Dave goes on to compare this to the game of scissors cut paper, paper covers rock, rock breaks scissors. And this goes on for the next 8 hours, during which time our 8 people, who are the effective American Army here, are proceeding like this. At a point, their ammunition is running down. They send a jeep back toward the rear to find somebody and bring more ammunition. The jeep is not heard from again. They keep on firing like this in this fashion until their last of their ammunition is dribbling away. And until it appears that the logjam, the roadblock, is being cleared and the tank is beginning to come around it. As Dave phrases it, assuming that the tank would shortly appear at our front door, he goes up to the second floor of the house. He picks up a bazooka, which is one of the odd weapons that go along with them. Bazooka, you must understand, is a primitive rocket-propelled, recoilless device. It is primitive. Its aiming points are clumsy. It's almost impossible to hit anything with it, and if you do hit a Tiger tank, it's not going to do any damage. Besides this, Dave has his carbine, which is a downsized rifle. Nice little gun, you know, useful maybe for a very brief time. The mortarmen, the gunners downstairs, have disappeared too. So far as Dave knows, he is all alone. I'm going to read here what I had written up before because I had trouble with it. Dave Wheeler is on the second floor of the German house. The bazooka he speaks of is in this situation utterly, completely useless, and he knows it. Beside that, he has his personal am David Wheeler, and if I'm going to die here, I'm going to die fighting. I won't carry it on beyond that. That's just